aren't alive now, but the family. She's got a sister and their family, the Kemmers. In fact, the Kemmers have a cabin down on Equay-Seaway where the Hewlings had the cabin. So that's still on the life lease. And next door, the Fred Anderson family. There's people there that are still under a life lease. Then the Yenches, they have the life lease, and they're the next cabin over. I don't know about, the West Bay Club, which is way over on the west side, that's not a life lease, but they've got some arrangement where they're trying to keep it up. The good news about the life lease, you don't own it, you lease it, but you have to take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't say you have to let the public in. So what's going on now is there's some effort to let's extend those leases, but let's make it open to the public. In other words, the tour boat can come in and what have you. And that's we've got a new superintendent over here, and she's the one we had before with the Park Service. He didn't like anybody.
Right.
Yeah. And what they've done, they've created a wilderness area around all the islands, not Madeline, not sand. And the wilderness area is a quarter-mile out. You're not supposed to have motorized boats in there. You're not supposed to have, so that's restricted. The use. You can kayak, you can canoe, and you can go in and out. But the shoreline is really open to the public because as long as you're close to the water, I understand, or put your foot in the water, I don't know. But it's a different ball game, and hopefully they'll find a way. Lighthouses have been left to decay, not completely. Some of them now, there is a lighthouse volunteer at Sand Island. There's one at Michigan, and of course at Raspberry. Raspberry is the one that's used to be on the tour boat. I don't know if it still is. Phil, do you know if it's still on the tour boat?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But they used to go in there with people, and they'd have volunteers show them
I
food.
know they still stop at Manitou.
Oh, a fish camp
The
at
fish
Manitou.
camp in Manitou.
Okay. And actually, Sand Island doesn't have a dock. It has a rock cliff. Calm day, you can go in there with your boat, and there's still the metal rings on the rock where you can tie up. But you don't want to get back there.
Yeah, up on the north end.
Yeah, you been there?
Yeah, yeah. We've had picnics on those rocks.
If I can, Hugh, do you remember Julian
Oh,
Nelson?
yes,
He used to be a captain for the ferry line.
right.
He had a cabin on Rocky Island, and when the Park Service did come in, he did take life tenure, and he put that property in his son Bob's name. He has two kids, Heidi and Bob. Bob is the younger, and they still have accessibility to the cabin, and like you say, they have to maintain it. And I think there's a Halverson
Right.
also on Rocky that is still in the family.
I personally hope that they find a new way to let these people who want to be good to the property, and I'll tell you, if it wasn't for the Yenches and the Andersons and the Hewlings and the Nelsons, and Bob Nelson is very involved with the Bayfield Heritage Association, and they have a wonderful museum over there in town, if you ever have a chance to stop there. And it has a lot of history of Sand Island and Rocky Island and some of the other islands. And I've become a lighthouse nut, because I just dropped this. If you want to do a little research on a lighthouse, look up Standard, Standard Lighthouse.
Yeah.
It's 42 miles out in Lake Superior from Marquette and 25 miles from the end of Keweenaw Peninsula. When I was in the Coast Guard, we took lighthouse keepers off of that lighthouse. Two of them were of the old lighthouse service. They'd been stuck out there because of the weather for weeks. I'll never forget this young coastie like me. I'm like 20 years old, and we're taking these two young guys off who were part of the crew, and one of them was redheaded guy, red beard. We're going home. He was nuts. We're going home. And they had problems with that out there. They never had a suicide, but they had a lot of guys that once they got off the island, they would go AWOL. I mean, they just couldn't take it. But that's
really, I see.
and then they were closing the place down, and they had an explosion while they were doing that, and they killed one of the closest. And now it's still lit, and they're putting other. There may even be someone because the tower was burned out from that explosion, and the guys that survived the explosion, they couldn't get back into their quarters. They had a tarp out on the deck of the lighthouse, thinking that we'll be rescued right away because someone's going to report the light is out. And 3 days later, a Coast Guard buoy tender showed up on a routine mission, they had no way to communicate. Everything was out. So. Well, that's another thing about you go out to these islands like we did when we were young. There's no way to communicate. You can just hope someone else will see what's going on. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you, you've mentioned Bird Hill on one end, and then the 3 cabins, the Anderson. What about the Shaw you mentioned? Can you talk a little bit about Shaw?
Yeah, well, Shaw probably was the only Norwegian that ever came to Sand Island, but he came there in like 1870. He didn't build his permanent, he was the first one to have any housing, any way of staying on the island. And he built his permanent house about 1898. Now, back in those days, these were year-round houses. They were not, because later on, when I was there in the 40s, Carl Dahl, my sister's father-in-law, they would, because the kids, once they got old enough, they had to come to Bayfield for schooling. Mother would come with the kids and they'd rent something in Bayfield. Dad would continue to fish because the fishing season closed down about the middle of December, sometimes earlier and sometimes later. So anyway, Shaw was the first one down in that corner, which was the southeast corner of the island. And he was a farmer, so he grew a lot of vegetables and berries. The island was full of berries. And they would take those to Bayfield to sell and other things. And he was a fisherman and a logger. One of the guys had a logging camp out there. It was really a settlement when you think about it. With up to 100 people. Now, of course, the fishing collapsed that whole area when it went down. I know Carl Dahl, who actually took over from Shaw to help the people along the shoreline there. He was forced off the island because of the sea lamprey and somewhat overfishing too. But there's arguments both ways. So.
And then, can I ask another?
Sure.
So there's a schoolhouse there, which I did not know, but I know that the island, school district number 1, sent some of their La Pointe school teachers out to different islands to teach the kids on the islands that had the quarry workers. So would Sam have been one of them?
No,
Do you know?
no. All I know about the teachers there that they were full-time and stayed right there.
And stayed there, okay.
Yeah. And they went through teachers. I mean, it was, I'm looking back at the number of teachers. And you think about it, they had up to 27 kids at one time. And of course, as those kids got older, they had to go off the island, and that's why they closed the school. School got too small, they couldn't afford it. Yeah.
So do I recall there was a road that came from mainland over to Sand?
No,
So
never
it was
a
all boating?
A lot of people think that when you look at a chart of Sand Island, you see that blue strip. That's shallow water. That's where you don't want to go.
Okay.
And a lot of sailors know enough to stay out of there unless they really know how to get through there. You can get through there, but there's big rock. I've been through there. Big rocks. In a motorboat you can watch where you're going
I
on
know
a
we've
calm
gone
day.
through there and people have told us in the past that this is road, so there was no.
Ice
Maybe
road.
you're referring to an ice road.
Yeah,
Blue
Yeah, should
usually
they drive in the
signifies.
ice?
They used to, they never had an ice road per se, but they did walk across the ice. And by the way, some of those farmers had horses and what have you, and that's how they would cut ice for the ice houses, and they'd pull those blocks of ice out of the water, skid them up into the ice house with horses. And so there's a lot of horses on the island. But most of the time, if they had to go to Bayfield, if they could get over to Little Sand Bay, there was enough people living there, and of course, the roads helped out, because before the roads, they had to come with boat all the way around to Bayfield, and I think that was about a 4-hour ride in a powered fishing boat.
yeah.
Yes, Ed?
You, is the island, all privately owned now, or what's the makeup of the
Alright.
ownership?
What happened to all the islands except Madeline, under the Park Service. And so it's part of the Park Service. And it's only those who have the leases that isn't Park Service. And in fact, the only island that's doesn't have a wilderness designation around it, that's a relatively new thing, is Sand Island. I don't know how that happened, but because the wilderness, the 1/4-mile ring around these islands, other than Madeline and Sand, restricts motorboating. I don't know if you remember that year that they had an ice road all the way out to, was it Devil's Island? Remember that? And they had a big, the Islanders had a big party out there. They plowed the road, everything. Wow. You remember that? Okay.
Two airplanes came in that.
Okay. Anyway, they took out the charcoal grills, and they just had a beautiful day.
Oh,
Well, when Kumanacher, the superintendent, heard about that, because people had taken pictures, he wanted to get the pictures so I can go after him and arrest him for violating the wilderness
oh,
designation. Yeah.
oh my.
When was that instituted?
Oh God, I can't remember that. I can't remember that. I don't know.
Well, what, would it have been part of the National Lakeshore?
Yes,
I
that's what I
assume,
mean.
yeah, which I think was
National Lakeshore.
74, I think.
Well, 70 was when the act was,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Nixon actually signed it,
yeah,
Which
that's
is-
right.
and, but then I think then there was maybe the second part where Long Island was included, it wasn't included at first. But so it's all National Lakeshore, and, so under the Park Service, yeah.
I just started, thanks to their friends group, we're trying to get people to volunteer down in the museum. I started volunteering about a month or so ago, and I'm sitting down there in the old part of the museum with this guy from Red Cliff,
Oh.
Rob.
Yeah.
You get him telling stories, you'll
Right.
say, oh my God, I
Yeah.
can't believe what went on back here in the early days. But he's very interesting, yes,
Yeah.
Phil?
Sherman Edwards, another retired ferry boat captain. His family, or his dad fished out on the islands also. And Sherman would tell me stories about, they would be in Bayfield and they would get an influx of their relatives that would have to come off the islands in the wintertime. They would
Oh,
move into their house
Oh,
in
yeah.
Bayfield along with, he and his siblings. So they had crowded houses
For the-
most of the winter.
oh gosh,
And then in the spring, everybody would move back to the islands.
oh,
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And on Sand Island, it was Norwegians. And the first Norwegians, some of them would go back home and bring more family out. And when the word got out, and the reason why they liked this area was it reminded them of Norway.
yeah.
You know, they were
Cold and dark.
fishing in the fjords, and a lot of them, where we had a good economy there, they had a bad economy there, and that kind of helped them decide to come over this way. But no, I know the Edwards family I don't know if they still have Life Estate or not out there, but I know they have.
I know Julian, Nelson, Bob, they're in a sharing agreement right now. I believe they had a place on Rocky,
Yes, I've been there.
and Bob and Heidi
Heidi.
still have it. But there's 2 cabins there and they share one cabin with Sherman and his family, and Bob and Heidi have the other.
Hmm.
Phil, would you be willing to introduce yourself? Because you have a great history with the
Oh.
ferry line, and not everybody probably knows your
Oh,
history.
Yes, I'm Philip Schneeberger, and I started working for Harry Nelson on the Nichigo in 1969. I worked a year and got my, you have to have at least 1 year experience on the boat before you can write the Coast Guard test. So in 1970, I wrote the Coast Guard test, failed it the first time. It's a very strenuous or a very tough test. And I, after I failed it, I was able to take it again 30 days later, got my license, and ran also in 1970, Madeline Island Ferry Line was formed. So I became an employee of Madeline Island Ferry Line when they merged, along with Julian Nelson, Gary Russell, Howard Russell, Charles Arnold Nelson, and Joe Nuago. And I retired in 2010 after 42 years.
2 years.
Hmm.
Wow.
And they live, he and Dolly live here on the island.
Yes.
How many years?
My wife is, actually, her family is from the island. She can trace her genealogy back to Michael Cadat
Right.
and that family, and yes, for the first 21 years,
First 21 years what?
we lived here on the
We
island.
lived here 21 years,
Yeah,
yes.
and then, I don't wanna,
Keep going.
Go ahead.
We decided that we wanted to move to Bayfield. Both our parents, when we were growing up in school, didn't participate with us when we wanted to do things in school. But we wanted to do that for our children when they were in high school. And we put our property, Marcia Coleman has the home that we built. She owns it now. We put that up for sale when my older daughter started high school in Bayfield. It was 2 years before the home sold. It's in the middle of the island, it's not on the lake, and it's a home, year-round resident. And we were able to move to Bayfield in 91. And I continued to work for the ferry line.
That's
great.
You know, when you hear some of these older folks, Junior Nuago, for example. Junior lived on the island.
Joe,
Yeah. So Nuago, and he's still, I talked to him on the phone recently, he's over in Ashland. But
yes,
when you hear the Russells, they had to leave the island in the winter to go to Ashland and live with somebody to go to school, and then come home Friday.
Right.
So they did that for years.
Right.
They didn't go to the Bayfield school, so you can still get some stories from those people of what they did.
Pixie's got a question.
And forgive me if I just missed this, Hugh, but what brought you finally to Madeline?
Oh, okay. Well, a friend of mine was sailing up here, and some of you know Doug Harding, and some of you probably knew Dave Lentz. Dave worked with me in Minneapolis, and he came to my office and said, "Madson, boy, we can buy one of these condos up on the golf course for $50,000, and the bank is going to owe us $52,500." Well, I know enough about they don't do that unless someone doesn't tell them the truth, and that's what the realtor didn't tell the truth. But we bought the place. And we took it was almost done. We took the $2,500 for carpeting and painting. That's what got us to the island. And then after that, involved with, when Gary, you know that story, when he came to the island and he did the golf course, the yacht club, all the stuff, he was gonna turn this into another whatever. Well, he bought this log house, log building, and a tennis court from, Marty family, okay? Well, Dave Lentz, my partner in this other deal, they came to him and wanted some money. And he loaned them some money. And they didn't pay him back. So he got that building and the tennis courts. Then Dave came to me and said, Madson, I need some money. I said, how much do you need? I said, I can't give you that much, but I can give you half that much. But I want collateral, like you got collateral, how you got the, well anyway, that's how we got our cabin.
Well, then tell about running the tennis club.
Oh, well then, there had been the Marty family had this big house that burned in 1988, and we were there, not in the house, but in our cabin. Well, when the property was bought by Ted Gary, he put in another tennis court. So we bought it with 2 tennis courts. Well, we need income to take care of the tennis courts. So we started a tennis club, Island Tennis. And we said to families that were here for the summer, if you want to join, it's $125. And that money was only used to resurface the courts, like they just got through, I guess, in South. And the reason South Shore is there is a lot of those people used to play on the Marty courts. When Marty had a clay court, only one court. And when that was sold then to, these people said, gee, maybe we ought to build our own court. And that's how that got started. That's what I understand. I don't know, maybe someone else knows a better story. Am I running over?
Well, any other questions other than?
You may have answered this earlier, but do you know Gertrude Welch? I find her one of the most fascinating characters on Sand Island.
Well.
Maybe you already talked about her.
No, I didn't. And you were bringing up a great gal. She was a school teacher for Minneapolis. When the lighthouse service shut down, having a lighthouse keeper on Sand Island, 2 years later, she was able to get a lease. And she leased that place for I don't know how many years.
Decades.
Yes. And then the cost of the lease got too high, so she came back to this settlement area of Sand Island and built a cabin called Pretty Charm. And it survived the Park Service moving in. And they used it actually for quarters to house a park employee. And they also used it as some type of a art center or something. Now it's because of our wonderful Park Service, it's deteriorating. And there's another group that was formed that's like friends of, called the Apostle Islands Historic Preservation Conservancy. That was formed by the people that, well, like Bob Nelson and Mary Rice, and who said, hey, let's get an organization together and see if we can raise money to help preserve these buildings that the Park Service is supposed to preserve. When they took over those buildings, oh, we're gonna employ a lot of people in the area, we're gonna take care of this and that. You can tell I'm a little bit anti Park Service, because I've had enough of it to turn my, I'm not gonna pick on the new gal because she's good. And I think things will change. But anyway, that's Gertrude.
They left her car there though.
Yeah, well, there's actually ended up to be about 3 cars there.
Oh.
She left the car, and she left the keys in the car, and said, anyone on the island? There's a county road on the island that goes from the north end to the south end. It was when I was there, you could drive that road if you had a car, but then the wagons, horse wagons, and what have you would go that road. But that was actually called the county road, and there was 3 cars in the island. There's one of them. People who now walk out to the lighthouse. They're on that road. There's a whole relic of a car there.
Leslie.
So my understanding is that they won't people from the families who have cabins there that don't have the lease anymore have tried to go back and, fix them up, windows and stuff, and that the park service has changed, or has said that they can't do that. And is it clear that when they signed the leases over, saying that the park service would actually keep up their own,
Well, if you had a lease, you have to keep it up.
but after that, and
After that, supposedly,
the park
the
service
fire
said they
service is supposed to
keep it.
keep it up. And they always have an excuse, we don't have the money.
Huh.
And then, when, remember, we tried to do some fixing up of Plenty Charm, for example. Kumanaker wouldn't take our money, but there's another group called the Friends of the Apostle Island. He was part of that group. Oh yeah, if you raise some money, we'll take your money. So, now, it is, hopefully it'll be straightened out.
Is there any hope for figuring it out?
This new park superintendent is working hard on it, and there's been some retired park service people that live in this area. And one time they brought a bunch of other retired park people, just to see if we can't get more help from them. I remember I was on a cruise out on the Columbia River, and we went all the way down to the mouth, and there's a national park there, and I went out on my way to talk to the park service guy. They welcome people to come in and build something and fix something. Not over here, not when Kumanaker was here.
Is Bob McGrath still?
Yes, Bob is a historian.
Involved?
Yes, and he still lives over in Washburn, and he's written a lot of articles, and Bob McGrath was with the Park Service as a historian. And he's come over here to the museum and given speeches, and boy, if you see a speech that he's gonna give, please go to it, because he's just very good at it, let's put it that way, and he knows a lot about what's going on.
Well, thank you so much, Hugh. We really appreciate it.